To the record.
Without objection.
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, like all of my colleagues, I spend a lot of time talking with people in my district about this health care and what is happening. They were no way prepared for the influx of incredible rate increases that seem to come out of nowhere and fall like rain upon them, to the extent that most of them really are not sure they can even stay insured. Invariably, the conversation turns to health insurance. I hear about the increases. I hear about insurers that denied coverage. I heard from a father who had just had a child who was born with a condition that would make him uninsurable for the rest of his life. I listened to someone tell me that her husband's new insurance policy won't cover her because she has pre-existing conditions, or simply because it doesn't cover her. But now the Congress is on the brink of some common sense changes to the health insurance industry that will help to level the playing field a bit between ordinary Americans and the giant corporations that exert such power over our day-to-day lives. And I say our because I personally am caught in the same trap as most of my constituents. I don't have any kind of special coverage because I'm a member of Congress. I have always been on my husband's policy at home from Eastman Kodak. That has covered us since he retired, but it no longer will cover spouses. We are halfway through dropping spouses, and all the benefits that we got as spouses were taken away about 4 years ago. So it's not the worst plan, but it's not the best either. And under the health care bill endorsed by House Democrats, the insurance companies will no longer be able to deny insurance coverage based on pre-existing conditions or adjust premiums based on gender, which they do. You may not know that women, single women, are charged 48% more for health insurance or for their occupation. They wouldn't be able to drop coverage if you get sick. I was talking to a man just this morning who talked about all the money he had paid in health insurance, and when he made his first claim at the age of 30, they decided already he was going to be trouble and denied his claim. But what if they cannot anymore tell you that it costs too much to take care of your child? Insurance companies would have to publicize their rates and no longer can charge older Americans twice as much as the younger ones. For my money, though, there's one part of our reform package that's simple to explain, easy to justify, and 60 years overdue. And that part is to repeal the antitrust exemption given to the health insurance industry in 1945 by Congress, and that's why we are here today. There is no reason that any industry in the United States, including baseball, which was exempt as well, should be exempt from the one consumer protection that the federal government gives everybody against chicanery and collusion rate setting. Even though the broader effort to pass the final health care bill is underway, we have an opportunity today to make a simple, straightforward statement about how we think health insurance should operate in this country. By repealing this unjustifiable exemption, we will enable, and this is very important, people do not understand that during these 60 years, the Justice Department has not been able to enforce anything against them because they were exempt. This will enable the Justice Department to begin aggressively enforcing the laws that protect the consumers against the cartel of health insurance who wield such outsized influence in the healthcare industry. As it stands now, the insurance industry is allowed to fix prices, engage in other anti-competitive behavior. Because these companies are allowed to pool and share data and jointly establish premiums and the types of coverage, there is very little prospect for an average family to price shop. It's too tempting for big insurers not to cheat a little bit. Moreover, regulating the insurance industry is left up to individual states. Most of them will tell you that they really are not up to it, which often suffer from a lack of resources to effectively crack down on abuses. Each of the 50 states and the District of Columbia has its own regulatory framework. The traditions and intentions leads to a spotty patchwork of enforcement. In fact, according to a report from the Center for American Progress, there has been only extremely limited and sporadic state enforcement by state insurance commissioners throughout the 60 years. In the void, insurance companies have been free to engage in anti-competitive and anti-consumer behavior, resulting, as we said just recently, in some insurance premiums costing as much as 70%. As a result, this exemption thwarts free market pricing. It is impossible to defend today or at any other time. What we will be doing by removing this exemption is to tell the health insurance industries that they need to start behaving like every other industry. We tell them that colluding and conspiring to set prices at a certain level and to harm consumers is not going to work in America anymore. As I said, the history of this provision dates back to 1944, when some insurance companies went to court to challenge the notion that the federal government could enforce antitrust laws. Despite their best efforts, the Supreme Court ruled that the insurance business was subject to antitrust laws just like everybody else. Unhappy with that decision, the insurers effectively got Congress to invalidate the ruling of the top court. It was an amazing piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker. Both houses, Senate and House, passed legislation giving the insurance industry a 3-year transition period while they moved to be covered by what everybody else is covered by, antitrust. And both bills had passed, and when it came out of conference, the exemption was made permanent. Over the years, the opponents of McCarran-Ferguson, and I've been one of them for about 30, have been stymied. The last serious effort was led by Representative Jack Brooks in 1991, who tried and failed to change the law. Last year, when we again started in a serious effort to change the law, the industry geared up for a big fight. We heard from the American Insurance Association and the American Academy of Actuaries, among others, who argued that changing this law would somehow cost consumers more money. Other interest groups claimed the provision was poorly written, too broad, or a solution in search of a problem. Interestingly, some lobbyists have quietly begun to whisper that this provision will not have impact on their rates. They say it is too narrow in scope, and frankly, I would much have preferred to lift this exemption from the entire insurance industry instead of just health. But they are firmly opposed, make no doubt about that, and are lobbying to prevent it, which makes me wonder if they're sort of whistling past the graveyard. Now let's look back for a minute at the last major investigation of the health industry. 2 years ago, the Attorney General of the state of New York, Andrew Cuomo, investigated the collusion of health insurers. The companies were using Nginx, a billing data clearinghouse, to set rates, even though the company was owned by one of them. The evidence showed the insurers were conspiring together to artificially depress the level of reasonable and customary charges that would reimburse to healthcare providers, which shifted additional costs to the policyholder. In the face of a threat from Cuomo, the clearinghouse agreed to disband, and the insurance companies paid a sizable sum to resolve the charges. As recently as this week, there were fresh news reports out of California about abuses by a major insurer there, and it's important to remember that many people assume that conspiring to set rates is illegal in our country. I suppose most people believe that. Every high school student in America is taught about the Sherman Antitrust Act and how the creation of the Federal Trade Commission came about to level the playing field. Part of the motivation was to make sure that small businesses, who make up the backbone of our economy and fuel small towns from coast to coast, would have a chance against the big corporate interests. These creative new entrepreneurs needed to have confidence they would not be frozen out of the market by the big boys. And sadly, that's exactly what happened. In many states and regions across the country, there are often just a couple of health insurance companies operating. In New York, 2 companies control half the market. Many states have it even worse, including our neighbor Vermont, where 2 companies have 90% of the market share. Of course, some people will continue to insist that government should just stay out of this whole business. My colleagues on the other side often say no government's the best government, and free market works best if there's no attempt to regulate it. But I'd argue that any of that is far outweighed by the benefit we'd gain by having more competition, less concentration, and the assistance of a powerful watchdog. And I strongly encourage all of my colleagues to join me today in supporting the repeal of the McCarran-Ferguson Act. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves the balance of her time. The gentlewoman from New